The sun had just started to rise over the red hills of western Burkina Faso when the first suspicious movement was reported. It came from a small military drone patrolling the perimeter of the nation's largest gold mine. On the grainy feed, 4 heavy trucks, unmarked, but freshly painted, were seen leaving the restricted zone at dawn, long before any official transport was scheduled. President Ibrahim Traoré had been warned for weeks that something wasn't right. Local miners had whispered about strangers showing up at night, security cameras mysteriously going offline, unexplained fuel shipments arriving at 3 a.m. The mine was state-controlled, and no international contractors had been authorized to be on site. Yet the trucks on the drone feed were clearly not local. Traoré didn't delegate the investigation. He boarded a helicopter with a handful of trusted officers and flew directly to the site. From the air, the scene looked normal, workers arriving, equipment parked. But at the far edge of the mine, a dirt road led into the dense scrublands, and freshly made tire tracks disappeared into the trees. By the time the convoy of stolen trucks reached the final checkpoint, an old colonial gatehouse at the end of the territory, Traoré was already waiting. He stepped forward, in full uniform, and raised his hand. "Stop the trucks. Now." The drivers hesitated for a second, then accelerated. The soldiers beside Traoré instantly moved into position and blocked the road. The lead truck skidded to a halt so close he could feel the dust hit his boots. Traoré walked toward the door, opened it himself, and pulled the driver out. The man wasn't a miner. He wasn't even Burkinabe. The patch hidden under his jacket was unmistakable, a U.S. Special Operations insignia. Traoré looked at the rest of the convoy and said, loud enough for the nearby camera crews to record, "Not 1 ounce leaves this land." The soldiers quickly surrounded the other 3 trucks, weapons raised but calm, waiting for Traoré's signal. One by one, the doors opened, 4 men from the second truck, 3 from the third, and 2 from the last. None of them spoke. Their uniforms were plain, their boots spotless, their eyes cold. Every Burkinabe soldier in the checkpoint knew what they were looking at. These were not miners, not contractors. These were trained foreign operatives. Traoré stepped toward the rear of the lead truck and unlatched the cargo bay himself. As the metal door swung open, the morning light caught the deep golden glow of stacked ingots, freshly smelted, each stamped with Burkina Faso's state seal. There must have been 10 tons of it. A murmur rippled through the Burkinabe troops, part disbelief, part rage. They had all sworn to protect the wealth of their people. And here it was, being loaded in the dark by outsiders. Traoré's voice cut through the silence. "Who authorized this?" None of the operatives answered. He stepped closer to the man he had pulled from the truck, eyes fixed directly on his. "You came here without permission, entered our mines without a single agreement, and tried to leave before sunrise. You didn't come to negotiate. You came to steal." One of the operatives finally spoke, voice low, mechanical. "Step aside. This operation is above your jurisdiction." The soldiers instantly raised their rifles, but Traoré lifted his hand and stopped them. He leaned forward and replied quietly, "There is no jurisdiction above the will of a sovereign people." At that moment, more Burkinabe troops emerged from the forest behind the trucks, sealing every exit. Overhead, a drone camera hovered, live-streaming everything to the presidential media team. Across the country, phones lit up with the first clips: gold-filled trucks, detained operatives, and a president standing in the middle of the road with fire in his eyes. "Secure the gold," Traoré ordered. "And take them into custody." The detained operatives were transported under heavy escort to a secure military base just outside Ouagadougou. By the time they arrived, the entire country was already awake and talking. Radio hosts interrupted their morning music broadcasts. Headlines flashed across every screen: foreign agents caught smuggling Burkina's gold. In village markets and city cafes, people stood clustered around small TVs, shaking their heads and murmuring, "Arctic Yetter." Inside the interrogation room, the lead operative sat in silence, hands chained to the table. Traoré entered without any ceremony. He didn't bring intelligence officers. He didn't bring translators. He simply pulled out a chair and sat across from the man. "In whose name?" he asked. No answer. The operative's jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the wall. Traoré leaned forward. "You crossed 3 different security zones in the middle of the night. You bypassed our monitoring systems. You loaded 10 tons of sovereign gold into trucks. This isn't an operation, this is theft." Still, no reply. But even in silence, the truth was plain. It wasn't just about gold. It was about breaking a nation's spine in the shadows. Traoré stood up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back and spoke calmly. "Tell your commanders, this country is not a mine. It's a nation. And it will be defended like one." When he stepped outside, his defense minister handed him a secure phone. "Sir, international lines are burning. Washington is denying involvement." Traoré's eyes hardened. Let them deny. The gold speaks for itself. That afternoon, a televised press conference was called. Traoré appeared in front of the nation, with the recovered ingots stacked visibly behind him, cleaned, polished, and unmistakably marked with Burkina Faso's seal. "This," he declared, pointing to the gold, "does not belong in secret convoys. It belongs to the people who work this earth. And as long as I stand, not 1 ounce leaves this land." The crowd watching in the square erupted in cheers. In the background, the detained operatives were being quietly transferred to a military tribunal. The message had been sent, and the world had received it. Night fell over Manega base like a heavy curtain. Radar screens flickered in a dimly lit command room, showing heat signatures approaching slowly from the western border. They weren't random, you could see the steady rhythm of armored columns, moving with deliberate caution. At 23:47, a new signal pinged on the main screen, 3 rotary aircraft flying low, their transponders switched off. They came straight from a US-controlled airfield in Côte d'Ivoire. The defense minister looked up from the map. "They'll reach our airspace in 21 minutes. Traoré didn't speak. He rose from his chair, walked to the secure radio and opened a direct channel to the frontline commander. "This is the president. Any foreign aircraft crossing into our airspace, after a warning shot, is to be considered hostile. No exceptions." On the other side of the world, the Pentagon quietly briefed the media, "There is no combat deployment. Only an observation flight." But in the Sahel, everyone could hear the engines overhead. In a small village near the border, an old man pulled his grandson away from the window and whispered, "This time they are not after the gold, they are testing our courage." 002. The first helicopter reached the red line and simply hovered there, spotlights on, blades beating the night air like a dare. Every Burkinabe soldier along the frontier tightened his grip on his rifle. Traoré inhaled slowly. "One more step," he murmured, "and this becomes an invasion." The helicopter moved forward, barely a few meters, but it crossed the line. "Fire the warning." A white flash shot across the sky as a phosphor tracer exploded 300 meters in front of the craft, turning night into false daylight. The meaning was clear. Pull back. Or be pulled down. By the time the sun rose over Ouagadougou, the footage of the warning shot had already spread across the continent. News anchors replayed the moment the tracer round lit up the night sky, cutting just in front of the American helicopter. Commentators described it in simple terms: a line drawn, and defended. Inside the presidential situation room, new intelligence reports were being placed on the table. Satellite data confirmed unusual activity at a U.S. forward operating base in Côte d'Ivoire, fuel convoys moving all night, personnel loading armored vehicles under floodlights. Traoré studied the images in silence. His defense minister leaned in. "Whatever they try next, it won't be loud. It'll be a quieter move, cyber, infiltration, destabilization. The president nodded slowly. Then we don't just defend the border. We defend the idea behind it. At that very moment, cameras in Washington were recording another press statement. Trump stood at the podium, surrounded by military advisors. His voice didn't hide the threat behind the rhetoric. We want peace. But we won't hesitate to act against reckless regimes that threaten regional stability. Some networks applauded. Others replayed the quote side by side with images of Burkinabe villagers guarding their own checkpoints with lanterns and rifles. Within hours, 3 Sahel nations issued coordinated statements of support. One simply read, "Touch one, face all." By late afternoon, Traoré personally arrived at Menega base. No fanfare, no television crew, just a calm inspection of every checkpoint and every unit. The soldiers quietly straightened as he passed. There was no speech, only a single order. Keep the gates open. But let no foreign force take one step without the people's consent. The sky turned a heavy shade of gray, the kind that didn't promise rain, only the arrival of something powerful and unexpected. Night rolled back over the Sahel like a slow tide. In Menega base, the operations room was lit only by the glow of control panels and radar screens. The air was still, but everyone knew something was approaching. On the main monitor, 3 new heat signatures appeared, unmarked rotary aircraft skimming low, their transponders still dark. At 23:58 a.m. coded message flashed across the tactical display, inbound from coastal FOB, likely U.S. origin. The defense minister glanced at Traoré. 17 minutes until border contact. Traoré didn't hesitate. He lifted the secure handset and spoke with calm precision, "This is the president. Issue final warning protocol. If they cross, they are no longer observers, they are intruders." Across the Atlantic, a Pentagon spokesperson was already briefing the press, "There is no hostile operation underway. These are standard reconnaissance procedures." But the engine slicing across the Sahel sky told a different story. In a nearby border village, families gathered under a single lantern. An old woman, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, murmured, "They took the gold in silence. Now they test our silence." No one replied, but everyone understood. 014. The lead helicopter hovered just meters from Burkinabe airspace, floodlights cutting across the frontier. It didn't fire. It didn't speak. It simply advanced. Traoré stood behind the operators in the command room, watching the live feed. "One more meter," he said quietly, "and history starts recording." The helicopter edged forward, crossing the red line. There was no doubt now. Lock target. Surface-to-air systems went live, tone lights flashing red on the screen. A white tracer exploded across the sky, close enough to shake the aircraft with its shockwave. That was enough. The helicopter banked hard to the right, withdrawing into the darkness. The 2 others followed immediately. Silence followed. Then, a voice crackled over the radio from the border post. "Targets have retreated. No further incursions." Traoré exhaled, slowly. The first battle hadn't been fought with bullets, but with clarity. And tonight, clarity had won. By morning, the entire country knew what had happened during the night. The warning shot had become legend. People passed phone videos from hand to hand, grainy footage of the tracer streaking across the sky, followed by the helicopters veering away like startled birds. Children drew it in chalk on school walls. Elders nodded quietly and said, "That is how a nation stands." Inside the capital, something remarkable began to unfold. Farmers formed volunteer watch units along back roads. Teachers organized neighborhood communication groups. Mechanics turned old trucks into mobile barricade units. No orders were given, everyone simply acted. Meanwhile, intelligence assets reported a shift in American posture. The armored convoy stationed near the coast had stopped moving. Supply shipments to the forward operating base were suddenly reduced. The generals in Washington were debating something they hadn't planned for, a population that was not afraid. At the morning briefing, Traoré listened carefully as his advisors described the shift. A junior officer finished his update with a quiet statement, "They're waiting, sir. Waiting for us to make a mistake." The president looked around the room. "Then we won't give them one." He turned to the secure communications screen and opened a call to Mali and Niger. The three leaders spoke quickly and decisively, agreeing to synchronize their defense protocols. If anyone crossed any one of their borders, the response would come from all. Across social media, a phrase began trending throughout Africa. #StepOntoOurLand. No more hashtags about gold or borders, now it was about soil, dignity, and the refusal to be intimidated. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, citizens lit small fires at village crossroads, not as a signal of fear, but as a reminder. This is where we stand. And if you want us to move, step onto the field. 48 hours after the helicopter incident, the confrontation entered a new phase. It didn't begin with aircraft or armored convoys. It began with silence. At 2:13, the main communications hub near the western border suffered a coordinated cyber attack. Cameras froze. Power dipped for exactly 46 seconds. No one crossed the line, no weapons were fired, but every technician in the command center knew what it meant. Someone was trying to blind the country before moving again. Traoré arrived at the command post minutes later, still in field uniform. The room was tense. "Status?" he asked quietly. "Systems restored, sir." The attack came from masked servers routed through foreign satellites. "Same signature we saw 2 days ago." He nodded once. "Then they've changed tactics. They want us to panic and overreact." But the country didn't panic. Within hours, villages reactivated manual alarm systems, steel drums, lantern codes, and lookouts placed in the hills. Students volunteered to help maintain offline communication routes. Farmers organized fuel rotations so generators would never go dark. It was crude and simple, and completely unhackable. At the same time, field agents reported a sudden uptick in diplomatic traffic. U.S. envoys were quietly pressuring neighboring governments to distance themselves from Burkina Faso. The intent was clear: isolate them before making the next move. Traoré requested an emergency call with allied heads of state. He didn't speak long. "If they want to isolate one of us, they must deal with all of us. Solidarity is now a deterrent." The line went silent for a moment, and then three leaders answered in unison. "Agreed." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, families across the region lit small lanterns in their courtyards. Not for light, but for signal. One by one, hills and rooftops began to glow like constellations across the land. It wasn't electricity. It was unity. Another night, another test. At 3:41 a.m. radio operator at a remote border post reported a sudden blackout of his camera feed. Seconds later, the backup feed dropped as well. No gunshots. No engines. Only darkness. He didn't panic. He followed the new protocol: send a single word over the encrypted channel, Yoklama. Probing. Within 15 minutes, a mobile unit arrived and restored local power. Nothing had crossed the fence. No personnel were missing. But everyone knew what it was. An attempt to see how long it would take for the nation to respond. Traoré received the report in the presidential compound, standing in a room lit only by a single desk lamp. He read the transmission once and set it down. "They're checking for weakness," he said quietly to his security chief. "Let this be our answer." Across the country, volunteer watch teams intensified their patrols. Some used radios and flashlights. Others used drums and burning torches. In the cities, neighborhood groups took turns staying up through the night in rooftop shifts. No one complained. It no longer felt like duty, it felt like belonging. The next morning, an intelligence briefing arrived from Washington. Intercepted communications showed that U.S. planners were reconsidering their next steps. One analyst had reportedly written, "We expected resistance. We didn't expect the entire population to mobilize." Traoré heard the report and gave a simple reply. "This doesn't mean the fight is over. It means the next move will come on our terms, not theirs." A few hours later, a single phrase appeared on social media across West Africa. "This land is not defended by soldiers. It is defended by all of us." It spread so quickly and so naturally that for a moment, even foreign analysts couldn't tell whether it was a slogan or a warning. By sunset, Independence Square in Ouagadougou was filled, not with protests, not with a rally, but with something far more powerful: presence. People stood shoulder to shoulder, in silence, as though forming a human shield around their own future. Traoré stepped onto the balcony overlooking the crowd. There were no television lights this time. No teleprompters. Just the voice of a man speaking to his people. "We didn't stand in front of weapons," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We stood in front of intentions. They came for our gold. They returned to test our resolve. And they discovered that our resolve is not stored in vaults. It is here." He tapped his chest. "In the shadows, they thought we would stay quiet. Instead, a nation rose without being called. They tried to find our weak points, and found only one thing repeated across this land. Not 1 ounce leaves this land." The crowd didn't cheer at first. They simply raised a hand to their heart, and held it there. Later that night, as people slowly returned home, an old woman placed a small stone at the base of the square. Someone else placed another. Then another. By morning, the stone pile had become a small wall, each rock marked with a single word: dignity. It wasn't on any map. But it might have been the strongest border the country had ever built. Let history record what happened here. They came in silence, believing they could steal what belongs to us and disappear before the sun rose. They did not expect to find an entire nation standing in their path. We did not answer them with fear. We answered them with unity. And we reminded them of a simple truth. This land is not defended by one man. It is defended by all of us. So to those who still believe they can walk into our country, take our resources, and leave untouched, hear me clearly. Not 1 ounce leaves this land. That is not a slogan. That is not a declaration of war. It is a promise, from every farmer, every soldier, every mother, every child. A promise that we will stand again. And again. And again. For as long as it takes. Asterisk.